Chapter 1. The Rising Sun. Japan's Ambitions. Japan in the late 1800s was a country of change. For centuries, it had been isolated. No foreign ships could enter its ports. No foreign ideas could cross its borders. But in 1853, everything changed. American ships arrived. They were big, black, and powerful. Japan could not resist them. The country opened its doors to the world. The leaders of Japan were worried. They saw how strong other nations were. They did not want Japan to be left behind. So they made a bold decision. Japan must modernize. It must grow strong, like the Western powers. It was time for a new Japan. Factories were built. Railways spread across the land. The army was trained in new ways. The navy grew with modern ships. Japan was transforming. It was no longer a country of farmers and samurai. It was becoming a nation of machines, cities, and soldiers. The world began to notice. Japan was rising. But there was a problem. Japan was small. It had mountains and forests, but not enough land for farming. Its people needed more food. Its factories needed more materials, like coal, oil, and iron. Japan could not find everything it needed at home. What could it do? The answer was clear to its leaders: expand. Japan's leaders believed they had a mission. They wanted to make their country strong and respected. Some said it was Japan's destiny to lead Asia. Others believed they had to protect their nation from Western powers. If Japan did not grow, it might be crushed by stronger countries. Expansion seemed like the only way forward. In 1894, Japan went to war with China. China was weak, and Japan won. It took control of Taiwan and other territories. 10 years later, in 1904, Japan fought Russia. This time, the world was watching. Russia was a giant, but Japan surprised everyone. Its navy sank Russian ships. Its soldiers won battles. In 1905, Japan became the first Asian country to defeat a European power in modern times. The world was amazed. Japan's leaders were proud, but they wanted more. They saw how Western nations built empires. Britain had India. France had Vietnam. The United States controlled the Philippines. Why not Japan? They believed their nation deserved the same. They looked to Korea and Manchuria, regions rich in resources. Japan began to expand its influence there. But expansion came at a cost. Other countries were watching. They did not trust Japan. Tensions grew. In the 1930s, the world fell into crisis. Economies collapsed. Countries turned inward, struggling to survive. But Japan saw opportunity. It invaded Manchuria in 1931. It set up a puppet government. This action shocked the world. The League of Nations, an international organization, told Japan to stop. But Japan refused. It left the League and continued its plans. Inside Japan, the mood was changing. People were proud of their military victories. They believed their country was strong. Schools taught children that Japan was special, that its emperor was divine. The military grew more powerful. Some generals believed Japan could do anything. They wanted to build a great empire across Asia. The people were told that Japan's expansion would bring peace and order. But was this true? In 1937, Japan invaded China again. This time, the war was brutal. Cities like Shanghai and Nanking were attacked. Millions of people suffered. The Japanese soldiers believed they were unstoppable. But resistance grew. The Chinese people fought back fiercely. The war dragged on. Japan's leaders did not expect this. They thought victory would be quick. Instead, the war drained Japan's resources and tested its people. As the 1930s ended, Japan's ambitions were clear. It wanted to dominate Asia. It needed resources to fuel its factories and armies. But Japan's actions worried other nations. The United States and Britain began to act. They placed limits on trade with Japan. Oil, steel, and other supplies were cut off. Japan faced a tough choice. Should it back down? Or should it fight for what it needed? This was a time of uncertainty. Japan had become a modern power, but it was not yet secure. Its leaders believed they had no choice. Expansion was their only path. But how far would they go? And what price would they pay? The people of Japan were caught in the middle. Many supported their leaders. They believed in their nation's greatness. But others worried about the future. Would Japan's ambitions bring glory or disaster? No one knew what lay ahead. One thing was certain. The rising sun was shining brighter than ever. But storms were coming. Chapter 2. Empire in the Making. The Invasion of China. It was 1937. Japan had grown powerful. Its leaders believed in a dream to create a great empire. They wanted resources, land, and control. They looked to China, a country rich in land and people. For years, Japan had taken small steps into China, but now it wanted more. Tensions between Japan and China were high. Small clashes happened often. One night in July 1937, near Beijing, shots were fired. No one knows who shot first, but that moment changed everything. Japan used it as a reason to send more troops into China. War had begun. At first, Japan's army moved quickly. It had modern weapons and well-trained soldiers. Chinese forces were weaker. The Japanese captured Beijing, then Shanghai. Each victory made them more confident. They thought the war would be easy. They were wrong. The fighting was brutal. In Shanghai, bombs destroyed homes and shops. Thousands of civilians were killed. Families fled, carrying whatever they could. The streets were filled with crying children, frightened mothers, and wounded men. The sound of gunfire and explosions was everywhere. The city was left in ruins. Then, the Japanese army marched toward Nanking, the capital of China. The Chinese government had fled, leaving the city defenseless. The Japanese arrived in December. What happened next shocked the world. The Japanese soldiers entered Nanking with no mercy. For weeks they killed, looted, and burned. Over 200,000 people died. Many were civilians, women were attacked, families were torn apart. It was a time of horror and pain. The world called it the Nanking Massacre. Japan's leaders denied the truth, but survivors told their stories. Their voices could not be silenced. At home in Japan, people heard different news. Newspapers and radios spoke of victories. Soldiers were called heroes. Many Japanese believed their country was bringing peace to Asia. But this was not true. The war was creating pain, not peace. In China, the people refused to give up. They resisted in every way they could. Soldiers fought bravely, even when they were outnumbered. Civilians hid Japanese weapons or passed secret messages. The Chinese countryside became a battlefield. Every village, every road, every river was a place of struggle. Japan's army began to face problems. China was much larger than Japan had expected. Its soldiers were spread too thin. Supplies ran low, and the Chinese kept fighting. It was not the quick victory Japan had hoped for. The war dragged on, costing lives and resources. The international community watched. Newspapers in the United States and Europe wrote about the war. Photos of the destruction in Nanking shocked readers. People asked, "How can this happen?" But no one acted. The world was already divided. Germany was rising in Europe, and many nations were focused on their own problems. Japan felt strong. Its leaders believed they were unstoppable. They wanted more than China. They dreamed of an empire that stretched across Asia. But their dream was dangerous. It ignored the suffering of millions. It ignored the limits of Japan's power. By the end of 1937, Japan controlled many parts of China. But control did not mean peace. Resistance continued. The Chinese people fought back harder than ever. Japan's leaders began to worry. They had started a war they could not easily end. Life for Japanese soldiers was not easy. Many were far from home, tired, and afraid. Some questioned what they were doing. Others were loyal to their leaders and believed in the mission. But as the war dragged on, doubts grew. The victories felt hollow. The losses were heavy. In China, life was even harder. Entire cities were destroyed. Families were separated. Farmers lost their land. Hunger and disease spread. Yet the Chinese people did not give up. They found strength in their struggle. They hoped for freedom and peace. The invasion of China showed the world a new Japan. It was not just a rising power. It was an empire in the making. But this empire came at a terrible cost. It brought death and destruction. It created enemies. It planted the seeds of future conflict. As 1937 turned to 1938, the war showed no signs of ending. Japan had started something it could not control. The dream of a great empire seemed further away than ever. And the world, watching from afar, wondered what would happen next. Chapter 3. Storm Clouds in the Pacific. The year was 1939. War had broken out in Europe. Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war. Soon, the entire continent was fighting. The world watched as battles raged. In Asia, Japan saw an opportunity. Japan's leaders believed they could use the chaos in Europe to their advantage. Western powers like Britain and France were distracted. Their colonies in Asia seemed vulnerable. Japan thought it was the perfect time to expand its empire further. But there was one problem: the United States. America was a powerful nation. It had a strong navy in the Pacific and large colonies, like the Philippines. Japan and the United States were already tense. Both nations wanted influence in Asia. Both were preparing for a possible conflict. The two countries began to exchange warnings. Japan wanted to keep expanding, but the United States said no. America worried about Japan's growing power. It started to cut off supplies to Japan. Oil, steel, and rubber, all essential for Japan's military, were stopped. Japan felt cornered. The tension grew even more when Japan joined an alliance with Germany and Italy in 1940. The three countries called themselves the Axis powers. Together, they promised to help each other. If one was attacked, the others would fight back. Japan believed this alliance made it stronger, but it also made the United States more cautious. Would Japan use this alliance to start a war in Asia? In 1941, Japan's leaders faced a difficult choice. They wanted to keep growing their empire. But they also knew that fighting the United States would be risky. Japan did not have the same resources as America. Its leaders wondered, could they win such a war? To prepare for any conflict, Japan's army and navy began to plan. They trained their soldiers. They built more ships and planes. They studied America's weaknesses. The mood in Japan was tense, but determined. Many people believed their country was destined to lead Asia. They were willing to fight for that dream. The United States also prepared. President Franklin D. Roosevelt watched Japan carefully. He did not want war, but he knew it might come. The American Navy strengthened its bases in the Pacific. Troops were sent to protect places like Hawaii and the Philippines. Both nations were waiting. It felt like a storm was building. As the months passed, the situation grew worse. Japan needed oil to power its tanks and planes. Without it, their military could not fight. But the United States refused to lift its embargo. Japan's leaders became desperate. Some wanted to negotiate. Others wanted war. The debate was fierce. In secret meetings, Japan's military made a bold plan. If they had to fight the United States, they would strike first. They would attack quickly, hoping to destroy America's ability to fight back. It was a gamble, a dangerous one. But Japan believed it was their only chance. Meanwhile, life in Japan was changing. Factories worked day and night to build weapons. Soldiers trained endlessly. Propaganda filled the streets and schools. Children were taught to be loyal to their country. Many people were proud of Japan's strength. But others were afraid. They worried about what war might bring. In America, people were also anxious. The United States had not joined the war in Europe yet. But many Americans felt it was only a matter of time. News of Japan's aggression in Asia made them uneasy. Would the United States be drawn into another world war? The alliance with Germany and Italy made Japan feel powerful, but it also created enemies. Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States watched the Axis powers closely. They knew these nations wanted to dominate the world. The question was, how far would they go? By late 1941, the storm in the Pacific was ready to break. Diplomats from Japan and the United States met to discuss peace. But the talks went nowhere. Neither side would back down. Japan's leaders decided they had waited long enough. They would act. The people of Japan did not know what was coming. Soldiers whispered about secret missions. Generals met behind closed doors. Ships and planes were moved into position. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Everyone felt that something big was about to happen. On the other side of the ocean, the American people went about their daily lives. They listened to the radio, worked in factories, and tried to enjoy life. But many felt uneasy. The Pacific seemed so far away, yet the danger felt close. Chapter 4. The Road to Pearl Harbor. The year is 1941. Japan stands at a crossroads. Its leaders are under pressure. The United States has cut off vital supplies. No oil, no steel, no rubber. Without these, Japan's factories cannot run. Its ships and planes cannot move. The empire's dream of expansion seems to be slipping away. Japan's leaders gather in secret meetings. They argue about what to do. Some want to negotiate with the United States. Others believe there is only one solution: war. The military grows louder. They say Japan must act now. Waiting, they warn, will make things worse. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo listens. He is a military man, strong and determined. Tojo agrees with the generals. He believes Japan must strike first. It is a risky decision, but he thinks it is the only way to secure Japan's future. The choice is made. Japan will go to war. The plan is bold and dangerous. Japan cannot fight the United States directly for long. The American Navy is large and powerful. But what if Japan destroys that navy before the war begins? What if it catches America by surprise? The generals believe this is the answer. They create a plan to attack Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base in Hawaii. The planning is done in secret. Only a few people know the details. Japan's best pilots are chosen for the mission. Ships and planes are prepared quietly. Messages are sent in secret codes. The Japanese people know nothing of what is coming. Even some soldiers are unaware of the full plan. The leader of the attack is Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He is a brilliant strategist, but he is also cautious. Yamamoto knows the risks. He understands the power of the United States. "We can win for 6 months," he says, "but after that, I cannot promise success." Still, he follows orders. He knows his duty. In Japan, life goes on as usual. Factories work day and night. Soldiers train. Children play in the streets. But under the surface, Tension is growing. War feels close, but no one knows when or where it will begin. The Japanese fleet sets sail in late November. It includes 6 aircraft carriers, battleships, and destroyers. They move quietly across the Pacific Ocean. The fleet stays hidden, avoiding other ships. The sailors are told to remain silent. No radios, no signals. They are heading for Hawaii. Back in Japan, diplomats continue to talk with the United States. They try to keep America distracted. The negotiations are a cover. Japan does not want the U.S. to suspect anything. But time is running out. The attack is planned for December 7th. At Pearl Harbor, life is peaceful. The sailors and soldiers enjoy the warm weather. Many are relaxing. They do not expect trouble. It is a Sunday morning and the base is quiet. Ships are docked in rows. Planes are parked neatly on the airfields. Everything seems calm. But far away, the Japanese fleet is preparing. The pilots gather for their final briefing. They are given maps of Pearl Harbor. They learn their targets, the battleships, the airfields, the oil tanks. They are told to strike quickly and with full force. There can be no hesitation. The pilots write letters to their families. Some are nervous, others are excited. They believe they are fighting for Japan's future. They climb into their planes, ready for the mission. The sun begins to rise. The attack is about to begin. The first wave of planes takes off just before 6 a.m. More than 180 aircraft fill the sky. Fighters, bombers, torpedo planes, all heading toward Pearl Harbor. The pilots fly low, staying out of sight. They are silent, focused, and determined. At Pearl Harbor, the sailors and soldiers wake up. Some are having breakfast, others are still sleeping. No one notices the danger approaching. The radar picks up something unusual, but it is dismissed. They think it is a group of American planes. The base remains unprepared. At 7:55 a.m., the first bombs fall. Explosions shake the harbor. Planes dive from the sky, machine guns firing. Ships are hit one by one. The USS Arizona is struck and erupts in flames. Sailors jump into the water, trying to escape the burning ships. The air is filled with smoke and chaos. The attack is swift and deadly. The second wave of Japanese planes arrives shortly after the first. More bombs fall. More ships are destroyed. The airfields are attacked. Planes on the ground are set on fire. The sound of explosions, gunfire, and sirens fills the air. It is a scene of destruction. The Americans fight back as best they can. Anti-aircraft guns fire into the sky. Some planes manage to take off and engage the attackers. But the surprise is complete. The damage is done. By 9:45 a.m., the attack is over. The Japanese planes return to their carriers. They have lost only a few pilots. The mission is considered a success. But in Japan, Admiral Yamamoto is not celebrating. He knows what will come next. "I fear," he says, "we have awakened a sleeping giant." At Pearl Harbor, the damage is devastating. 8 battleships are destroyed or badly damaged. Hundreds of planes are lost. More than 2,400 Americans are killed. It is a day of shock and sorrow. President Franklin D. Roosevelt calls it a date which will live in infamy. The United States declares war on Japan the next day. The attack on Pearl Harbor changes everything. The Pacific is now a battlefield. Japan has taken its first step into a larger war. But what will this decision mean for the nation? Will it bring the glory Japan seeks, or lead to disaster? Only time will tell. Chapter 5. A Day of Infamy. The morning of December 7th, 1941, began like any other in Hawaii. The sun rose over Pearl Harbor. The air was warm and the sea was calm. Soldiers and sailors at the naval base were starting their day. Some were having breakfast. Others were writing letters home. The air was filled with the sounds of everyday life: laughter, footsteps, and the hum of engines. But far out to sea, something unusual was happening. Japanese planes were in the air. Their engines roared as they flew closer to Pearl Harbor. The pilots were focused. Their mission was clear: attack and destroy the American fleet. The surprise had to be perfect. At 7:55 a.m., everything changed. The first bombs fell, and the world seemed to explode. Planes dived from the sky, their guns firing. Ships were hit. The USS Arizona, a massive battleship, took a direct hit. The explosion was so powerful it shook the harbor. Flames and smoke rose high into the sky. Sailors on board had no chance to escape. The ship sank quickly, taking over 1,000 lives. The sailors and soldiers at Pearl Harbor were caught off guard. Many were still in their bunks. They ran to their stations, confused and scared. The noise was deafening. Bombs exploded. Guns fired. Planes roared overhead. The water turned black with oil from the damaged ships. The air smelled of smoke and fire. Some men jumped into the harbor to escape the flames. The water was cold and full of debris. Others tried to fight back. Anti-aircraft guns began firing into the sky. A few American planes managed to take off. They fought bravely. But it was not enough. The Japanese attack was too sudden, too powerful. For nearly 2 hours, the chaos continued. The Japanese planes came in waves. Bombs and torpedoes hit ship after ship. The USS Oklahoma was hit multiple times. It rolled over, trapping hundreds of men inside. Rescue teams worked desperately to save them. Some were pulled out alive, but many were not. On the airfields, the destruction was just as severe. American planes were lined up, unprepared for an attack. They were easy targets. Bombs rained down, destroying the aircraft. Explosions echoed across the island. The ground shook. Smoke covered the horizon. By 9:45 a.m., the attack was over. The Japanese planes turned back to their carriers. The harbor was silent, except for the sound of burning ships and cries for help. The damage was devastating. 8 battleships were destroyed or badly damaged. Nearly 200 planes were lost. Over 2,400 Americans were dead. It was a day of sorrow and shock. Word of the attack spread quickly. Radios across the United States reported the news. People could not believe it. "Pearl Harbor has been attacked," they said. Families listened in horror, worried for their loved ones. How could this happen? Why was the country not prepared? Questions filled the air, but there were no answers. In Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt received the news. He was calm but determined. His face showed the weight of the moment. He knew what this meant. The United States was now at war. That evening, he began writing a speech to address the nation. The next day, December 8th, Roosevelt stood before Congress. His voice was strong and clear. He called December 7th a date which will live in infamy. He described the attack, the lives lost, and the destruction. He asked Congress to declare war on Japan. The vote was nearly unanimous. The United States was now fully involved in World War II. Across the country, people were angry. They wanted revenge. Young men lined up to join the military. Factories began working around the clock to build ships, planes, and weapons. America was waking up, ready to fight. The attack on Pearl Harbor had united the nation. In Japan, the news of the attack was met with celebration. The military believed they had achieved a great victory. They had destroyed much of the American fleet. They felt powerful and unstoppable. Soldiers and citizens cheered, confident that Japan would now control the Pacific. But not everyone in Japan was celebrating. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the man who planned the attack, was worried. He knew the United States was strong. The attack had been successful, but it had also awakened a giant. Yamamoto feared what would come next. "I fear," he said, "we have only awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve." At Pearl Harbor, the survivors began to pick up the pieces. The wreckage was overwhelming. Ships lay in ruins. Oil covered the water. The smell of smoke lingered for days. Families mourned the loss of their loved ones. Sailors worked tirelessly to rescue those who were trapped. Some were found alive, but many were not. Despite the destruction, there was hope. The American aircraft carriers, the most important ships in the Navy, were not at Pearl Harbor during the attack. They had been out at sea. This gave the United States a chance to rebuild and fight back. The war in the Pacific was just beginning. December 7th, 1941, changed the world. The attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into World War II. It was a day of tragedy, but also a turning point. The American people were now united in a common cause. They were ready to defend their country and fight for freedom. For Japan, the attack was a gamble. It gave them a temporary advantage, but it also brought a powerful enemy into the war. The events of that day set the stage for a long and brutal conflict. The Pacific would soon become a battlefield, with battles fought on land, sea, and air. The story of Pearl Harbor is one of bravery, sacrifice, and resilience. It is a reminder of the cost of war and the strength of the human spirit. As the smoke cleared and the world moved forward, one thing was certain. The events of December 7th would never be forgotten. Before we begin, Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on Woo English. Remember, This content is specially made for Woo English listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of Woo English's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. The Empire Expands. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan's military moved quickly. They had a plan to dominate Asia and the Pacific. Their leaders believed this was Japan's time to rise. The empire expanded like never before. In December 1941, Japan attacked multiple places at once. They struck the Philippines, a colony of the United States. They bombed airfields and harbors, destroying American planes and ships. Soldiers landed on beaches, pushing the defenders back. The fighting was intense, but Japan's army was strong. By early 1942, they controlled the Philippines. At the same time, Japan turned its eyes to Southeast Asia. British-controlled Malaya and Singapore became targets. Singapore was known as an impenetrable fortress. It seemed impossible to capture. But Japan's soldiers were prepared. They moved through the jungles, surprising the British forces. They used bicycles to travel quickly, avoiding main roads. By February 1942, Singapore fell. It was a shocking defeat for the British. Victory after victory followed. Japan took over the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia. These islands were rich in oil and other resources. Japan's leaders celebrated. The empire was growing stronger. From Burma in the west to the islands of the Pacific, Japan seemed unstoppable. Everywhere the Japanese army went, people were afraid. Their soldiers had a reputation for being fierce and disciplined. They marched into cities and towns, often using brutal tactics. Civilians were forced to work for the Japanese military. Many were treated harshly. In some places, entire villages were destroyed. The people of Asia lived in fear. But not everyone accepted Japan's rule. In the Philippines, resistance fighters formed groups. They hid in the mountains and jungles. They attacked Japanese supply lines and ambushed soldiers. These guerrilla fighters inspired hope among the people. The Japanese army struggled to stop them. In other countries, resistance grew too. In Burma, local fighters joined with British forces to challenge Japan. In China, the war continued. The Chinese people refused to give up, even as Japanese forces controlled large parts of their country. Across Asia, Japan faced small but determined enemies. At sea, the Japanese Navy was powerful. Their ships and planes dominated the Pacific, but cracks began to show. In April 1942, American planes bombed Tokyo. It was called the Doolittle Raid. The attack caused little damage, but it shocked Japan. How had the Americans reached their homeland? The Japanese people began to worry. Maybe they were not as safe as they thought. The United States was preparing to fight back. Factories across America worked day and night, building ships, planes, and weapons. Young men joined the military, ready to defend their country. Japan's leaders knew the Americans were coming. They needed to strengthen their hold on the Pacific before it was too late. By mid-1942, Japan controlled much of the Pacific. They occupied islands like Guam and Wake Island. They moved closer to Australia, threatening its safety. The people of Australia feared an invasion. But help was on the way. The United States sent troops and supplies to defend the region. Japan's expansion reached its peak in early 1942. The empire was vast, stretching across thousands of miles. But holding such a large area was difficult. Supply lines were long, soldiers were tired, resources were stretched thin, and the United States was growing stronger every day. In June 1942, everything changed. The Japanese Navy planned to attack Midway, a small island in the Pacific. They wanted to destroy the American fleet. But the Americans had broken Japan's secret codes. They knew the attack was coming. At the Battle of Midway, the United States struck back. They sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, a devastating loss. It was a turning point in the war. After Midway, Japan's expansion slowed. The victories that once came so easily were harder to achieve. Resistance movements grew stronger. American forces began their counterattacks. Japan's leaders realized they faced a long and difficult war. For the people of Asia, life under Japanese rule was harsh. Food was scarce. Families lived in fear. Many worked as forced laborers for the Japanese army. But they also found ways to resist. Secret groups formed, sharing information and planning sabotage. Their courage inspired others to fight back. In Japan, the mood was changing. At first, people had celebrated the victories. They believed in their nation's strength. But as the war dragged on, doubts grew. Families worried about their loved ones fighting far from home. Food shortages became common. The Japanese people began to feel the strain of war. By the end of 1942, the Japanese Empire was still vast, but its future was uncertain. The United States was advancing. The people of Asia were resisting. Japan's leaders faced a choice: continue their fight for dominance or find a way to end the war. But surrender was not an option for them. Not yet. The empire had grown quickly, but could it last? Japan's soldiers and sailors were brave and determined. Their leaders were confident, but cracks were showing. The once unstoppable empire now faced challenges from all sides. The tide of the war was beginning to turn. Chapter 7. Turning the Tide, Midway. In June 1942, the Pacific Ocean was calm. But beneath the surface, tension was growing. Japan's navy, once unstoppable, prepared for a bold strike. Their target was a small island called Midway. It was an important base for the United States. If Japan captured Midway, it could control the Central Pacific. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto led the Japanese plan. He believed the Americans would not expect such an attack. He wanted to lure their navy into a trap. Japan had 4 powerful aircraft carriers. These carriers had been victorious at Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto thought they would secure another victory. Confidence was high. But Japan did not know one important fact. The Americans had broken their secret codes. U.S. intelligence officers worked tirelessly, listening to Japanese messages. They discovered the plan. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the leader of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, prepared a counterattack. The Americans were ready. On June 3rd, Japanese ships moved toward Midway. They carried planes, bombs, and thousands of soldiers. The Japanese believed their attack would be a surprise, but the Americans were already watching. U.S. planes from Midway flew out to strike first. They caused little damage, but showed Japan that the battle would not be easy. The morning of June 4th, 1942, was clear and bright. Japanese planes launched their first attack on Midway. Bombs fell on the small island. Buildings burned. Runways were damaged. The defenders fought back bravely. Anti-aircraft guns roared. Pilots scrambled to their planes. Midway was still standing. While Japanese planes attacked the island, their carriers prepared for another wave, but they were vulnerable. They did not know that American carriers were nearby. The U.S. had 3 carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown. They launched their planes in silence. The battle was about to begin. The first American planes to attack were torpedo bombers. They flew low over the water, heading straight for the Japanese ships. The Japanese defenses were strong. Fighter planes and anti-aircraft guns filled the sky with bullets. One by one, the American bombers were shot down. It seemed hopeless. But then, something incredible happened. As Japanese fighters focused on the torpedo bombers, another group of American planes appeared. These were dive bombers, flying high above. They came down suddenly, like hawks attacking their prey. The Japanese carriers were caught off guard. In just minutes, the U.S. dive bombers changed the course of the battle. Bombs hit 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. Explosions tore through the ships. Fires spread quickly. The carriers, full of fuel and planes, became infernos. Sailors jumped into the sea to escape the flames. The Japanese were stunned. Their powerful carriers were destroyed. Only one Hiryu remained. But it was not enough. Hiryu launched planes in a desperate counterattack. They hit the USS Yorktown, causing heavy damage. The ship fought bravely, but eventually sank. Even so, the U.S. still had 2 carriers to continue the fight. American planes found Hiryu later that day. Dive bombers struck again. The last Japanese carrier was destroyed. The battle was over. Japan had lost 4 carriers, more than 300 planes, and many experienced pilots. The United States had turned the tide of the war. For Japan, the Battle of Midway was a disaster. It was their first major defeat. The loss of carriers and pilots weakened their navy. They could no longer attack as boldly as before. Japan's leaders were shocked. Their plans for expansion had failed. The empire's momentum was broken. In the United States, news of the victory spread quickly. It gave the American people hope. For months, they had been on the defensive. Now, they believed they could win. Factories worked harder than ever. Soldiers trained with renewed determination. Midway showed that the Japanese Navy was not invincible. the battle also changed Japan's strategy. After Midway, they focused on defending their empire instead of expanding it. They built strongholds on islands like Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima. They hoped to make it difficult for the United States to advance. But the Americans were determined. They would not stop until Japan was defeated. The sailors and pilots who fought at Midway became heroes. Many of them never returned home. Their bravery and sacrifice shaped the course of history. For both nations, the battle was a turning point. It marked the beginning of Japan's decline and America's rise. The ocean at Midway was calm again after the battle. But beneath the waves, the wreckage of ships and planes remained. It was a reminder of the cost of war. Thousands of lives were lost in those few days. The world would never forget the Battle of Midway. As the United States prepared to push forward, Japan faced a long and difficult fight. The empire had been shaken. The tide of war was turning, and the future was uncertain. For the first time, Japan's leaders realized they could lose. The battle had changed everything. Chapter 8. The Long Retreat. By late 1942, the tide of the war was turning against Japan. The Battle of Midway had been a crushing defeat. The Japanese Navy was weakened. The United States and its allies were growing stronger. Japan's empire, once expanding rapidly, was now under threat. The Allies began to fight back. Their first target was Guadalcanal, a small island in the Pacific. Japanese forces had built an airfield there. This airfield could be used to attack Allied ships and planes. The United States could not allow it to remain in enemy hands. In August 1942, U.S. Marines landed on Guadalcanal. The jungle was thick and humid. The ground was muddy and the air buzzed with insects. It was a difficult place to fight. Japanese soldiers were hidden in the trees and caves. They were skilled at jungle warfare. The Marines knew this would not be easy. The fighting on Guadalcanal was brutal. Soldiers on both sides suffered. At night, the jungle came alive with the sounds of battle. Gunfire echoed through the trees. Grenades exploded in the darkness. The Japanese launched fierce attacks, but the Americans held their ground. Supplies were scarce. Food, medicine, and ammunition had to be brought in by ship. Many men became sick with malaria. Others were wounded and needed care. Yet, the Marines did not give up. In the seas around Guadalcanal, the battle continued. Japanese and American ships clashed in deadly naval engagements. Planes from both sides fought in the skies above. The waters turned red with blood and oil. Ships burned and sank, taking hundreds of sailors with them. The struggle for the island was fierce. Finally, after 6 months of fighting, the Japanese withdrew from Guadalcanal in February 1943. It was a hard-fought victory for the Allies. For Japan, it was another step backward. The empire was beginning to shrink. As the Allies pushed forward, Japan faced more defeats. In the Philippines, U.S. forces returned to reclaim the islands. In Burma, the British and their allies advanced. Across the Pacific, island after island, fell to the Allies. Each battle brought Japan closer to its homeland. The Japanese army fought bravely, but suffered heavy losses. Supplies were running out. Soldiers went without food for days. Ammunition was scarce. Many fought with whatever they could find, knives, sticks, even their bare hands. Despite this, they refused to surrender. Japan's leaders demanded total loyalty. Soldiers were told it was better to die than to be captured. This belief led to tragic losses. Civilians also paid a high price. In the Philippines, Japanese forces killed thousands of people during their retreat. Entire villages were burned. Families were torn apart. The suffering was immense, yet resistance grew. In many places, civilians joined the fight against Japan. They worked with Allied forces, sharing information and sabotaging Japanese operations. Back in Japan, life was becoming harder. The once proud nation was now struggling. Food was scarce. Bombings by Allied planes destroyed cities and factories. Families worried about loved ones fighting far away. The government told the people to remain strong. Propaganda filled the streets and airwaves. It promised victory, but many began to doubt. In the Pacific, the Allies adopted a strategy called island hopping. They attacked key islands while bypassing others. Each victory brought them closer to Japan. The fighting grew more intense. On islands like Saipan and Iwo Jima, battles lasted for weeks. The Japanese defended every inch of land. Civilians were caught in the middle. Many chose death over capture, jumping from cliffs or hiding in caves. The jungle fights continued to be some of the most brutal. On New Guinea, Australian and American forces faced tough conditions. The jungle was thick, the terrain rough. Soldiers climbed mountains and crossed rivers. Japanese forces, though outnumbered, used the jungle to their advantage. It was a fight for survival. Despite their losses, Japan's leaders refused to surrender. They believed in their divine mission to protect the emperor and the nation. Surrender, they thought, was dishonorable. They demanded that soldiers and civilians fight to the end. This belief made the war even more painful. By 1944, the Allies were closing in. The Japanese Navy was nearly destroyed. The Air Force had few planes left. The Army was spread thin across Asia and the Pacific. Yet, Japan fought on. Pilots became kamikazes, flying their planes into Allied ships. These suicide missions shocked the world. They showed Japan's desperation and determination. For the Allies, victory was in sight, but it came at a high cost. Thousands of soldiers were killed or wounded in each battle. Ships were sunk. Planes were lost. The war in the Pacific was long and difficult. The jungle, the heat, and the enemy made every step forward a challenge. By the end of 1944, Japan was in retreat on all fronts. Its empire was shrinking. Once, it had seemed unstoppable. Now, it was struggling to survive. The people of Japan faced the reality of war. Bombs fell on their cities. Food was harder to find. Families mourned the loss of fathers, sons, and brothers. The dream of empire was slipping away. Yet, Japan's leaders did not give up. They prepared for the final battles. They believed they could still protect their homeland. Soldiers were ordered to defend every island to the last man. Civilians were told to be ready to fight. The war was far from over. The long retreat showed the strength and determination of both sides. Japan's soldiers fought bravely, even when the odds were against them. The Allies showed great courage, pushing forward despite heavy losses. The war was entering its final stage, but the cost of victory would be high. Chapter 9. Homefront Hardships. By 1944, life in Japan had changed. The war was no longer just something happening far away. It had come to the cities, towns, and villages. Bombs fell from the sky, food was scarce, and families lived in fear. The once proud empire was struggling, and ordinary people were paying the price. At first, the Japanese people had supported the war. They believed in their leaders. They trusted the military. News of victories filled the newspapers. Posters on the streets told them to stay strong. But as the war dragged on, hope began to fade. The bombings started slowly. At first, only military targets were hit, but as the Allies grew stronger, the attacks became more frequent and more destructive. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed. Wooden homes burned quickly. The skies were often filled with smoke. Sirens wailed, warning people to take cover. Children ran to bomb shelters, holding tightly to their mothers' hands. The worst came in 1945, when American planes began using a new type of bomb, fire bombs. These bombs caused massive fires. Tokyo was hit the hardest. One night in March, the city was set ablaze. The flames spread quickly, destroying homes, schools, and shops. Thousands of people died. Families were separated in the chaos. Many never found each other again. Food was another challenge. Japan had relied on imports for much of its food, but the Allied blockade made this impossible. Rice, vegetables, and fish became scarce. People stood in long lines to get even a small portion of food. Children grew thin. Mothers gave their meals to their children, even if it meant going hungry themselves. People found ways to survive. Farmers shared what little they had with city dwellers. Families planted vegetables in small gardens. Children gathered wild plants to eat. Yet, hunger was everywhere. The government urged people to endure. They called it gamen, or patience. It became a way of life. Meanwhile, fathers, brothers, and sons were at the front. Soldiers wrote letters home when they could. Their words were often cheerful, but the families knew the truth. Many soldiers would never return. Mothers kept their spirits up for their children, but at night they cried quietly. Each knock at the door brought fear. Was it news of a loved one? Was it the worst news? Schools changed too. Children were taught to be loyal to the emperor and the nation. They learned how to fight, even as young boys and girls. Some practiced with wooden sticks, pretending they were rifles. Others dug trenches to protect their towns. Teachers told them to prepare for invasion. The children obeyed, but they were scared. In the countryside, life was a little easier. The bombings mostly targeted cities. Farmers could grow their own food, though they were required to give much of it to the military. Still, even in rural areas, the war was felt. Planes flew overhead. Soldiers passed through. The fear of invasion was everywhere. For women, the war brought new challenges. Many had to take on jobs that were once done by men. They worked in factories, producing weapons and supplies. They built planes and repaired ships. Their hands became rough, their backs sore. Yet, they were proud to help their country. They worked long hours, often with little rest. Some women became nurses, caring for the wounded. Hospitals were overcrowded. Supplies were limited. The injured soldiers told stories of the battles they had faced. Some were sad, others hopeful. The nurses listened, offering comfort where they could. Despite the hardships, the Japanese people showed incredible resilience. They supported each other. Neighbors shared food and shelter. Communities came together to rebuild after bombings. Children played games, even among the ruins. Families sang songs to keep their spirits up. The people endured. The government continued to urge the people to fight on. Radio broadcasts spoke of honor and sacrifice. Posters encouraged everyone to give their all for the emperor. Even as cities burned and soldiers died, the message remained the same. Never give up. But doubts were growing. Some wondered if the war could be won. They saw the destruction, the hunger, the loss. Still, they could not speak out. To question the war was dangerous. It could lead to arrest, or worse. By 1945, Japan was struggling to survive. The cities were in ruins. The countryside was stretched thin. The people were tired. Yet, they kept going. They believed they had no choice. Surrender was unthinkable. Their leaders told them to prepare for the final battle. Everyone, men, women, and children, would fight to defend the homeland. Despite the hardships, there were moments of kindness and hope. A mother shared her last bowl of rice with a stranger. A teacher comforted her students during an air raid. A soldier sent home a small gift, a flower he had picked, pressed into a letter. These small acts reminded people of their humanity, even in the darkest times. As the war drew closer to its end, the hardships grew worse. Bombs fell daily. Hunger became unbearable. Families clung to each other, waiting for the war to end. They prayed for peace, though they did not know how it would come. Life on the Homefront was a story of suffering, but also of strength. The Japanese people endured more than most could imagine. They faced fear, hunger, and loss. Yet, they found ways to survive. They showed courage in the face of danger. Their resilience became a symbol of their spirit. Chapter 10. Fire from the Sky, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was August 1945. The war in the Pacific had raged for years. Japan was weak. Its cities were in ruins. Food was scarce. Yet the war continued. Japan's leaders refused to surrender. The Allies wanted to end the conflict. They turned to a new and terrifying weapon, the atomic bomb. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the city of Hiroshima was calm. People were starting their day. Children walked to school. Workers headed to factories. Mothers prepared breakfast. No one knew what was coming. High above the city, an American B-29 bomber named Enola Gay flew silently. On board was a single bomb called Little Boy. It was unlike any bomb ever used before. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb was released. It fell for 43 seconds before exploding in the air above Hiroshima. In an instant, the city was engulfed in light. A blinding flash turned night into day. Then came the heat, unimaginable, burning everything it touched. Buildings collapsed. Trees burst into flames. People near the explosion were vaporized. Those farther away were thrown to the ground. Their skin burned. A mushroom cloud rose high into the sky. The sound of the explosion echoed for miles. Survivors screamed in terror. The streets were filled with rubble and fire. The rivers ran red. Tens of thousands of people died instantly. Many more were injured. The scale of destruction was unimaginable. Those who survived faced a nightmare. Fires spread across the city. Survivors searched for loved ones. Many were horribly burned, their skin hanging in strips. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Doctors worked tirelessly, but there was little they could do. The injured begged for water. Many died before help could reach them. The people of Hiroshima could not understand what had happened. Some thought it was a massive air raid. Others believed it was a new kind of weapon. Few could comprehend the true power of the atomic bomb. The city, once full of life, was now a wasteland. 3 days later, on August 9th, 1945, it happened again. This time, the target was Nagasaki. Another B-29 bomber carried a bomb called Fat Man. The bomb was dropped at 11:02 a.m. It exploded over the city, causing massive destruction. The hills around Nagasaki contained the blast, intensifying its impact. In Nagasaki, as in Hiroshima, tens of thousands died instantly. Buildings crumbled. Fires raged. Survivors wandered the streets, dazed and injured. The horrors of the first bombing were repeated. Once again, the world saw the unimaginable power of nuclear war. The survivors, known as hibakusha, carried the scars of the bombings for the rest of their lives. Many suffered from burns and radiation sickness. Some lost entire families. Others were haunted by memories of that day. They told their stories so the world would never forget. In the days following the bombings, Japan faced a terrible reality. The atomic bombs had destroyed 2 cities. Millions of lives were shattered. The Allies demanded surrender. Japan's leaders were divided. Some wanted to fight on. Others knew the war was lost. On August 15th, 1945, Emperor Hirohito spoke to the nation. It was the first time the Japanese people had heard his voice. He announced Japan's surrender. His words were solemn and heavy. He described the bombings and the suffering they had caused. The war was over. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki changed the world. They showed the devastating power of nuclear weapons. They ended the war but left a legacy of pain and loss. Survivors carried the message, never again. Their voices reminded the world of the horrors of war. For Japan, the bombings marked the end of a dark chapter. The country would rise again, but the scars of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would never fade. The memories of those who lived through it remain a powerful reminder of the cost of war and the hope for peace. Chapter 11. The War Ends. Surrender and Reflection. By August 1945, Japan was in ruins. Its cities were bombed. Its people were hungry. The military was broken. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had brought unimaginable destruction. Japan's leaders knew the war could not continue. It was time to surrender. The decision was not easy. For years, Japan's government had told its people that surrender was dishonorable. Soldiers were trained to fight to the death. Civilians were told to prepare to defend their homeland. But now, surrender was the only option. On August 15th, 1945, a historic event occurred. Emperor Hirohito spoke to the Japanese people. It was the first time they had ever heard his voice. His message was broadcast on the radio. People gathered around in silence, straining to hear his words. The emperor's voice was calm and serious. He announced that Japan would surrender. He spoke of the terrible power of the atomic bombs and the suffering they had caused. He said the decision was made to save lives and to bring peace. Many listeners cried. Some were relieved. Others felt deep sadness and shame. The war was over. On September 2nd, 1945, the formal surrender took place. Representatives of Japan and the Allied forces met aboard the USS Missouri, a large battleship anchored in Tokyo Bay. The Japanese officials signed the surrender documents. General Douglas MacArthur, representing the Allies, spoke of peace and rebuilding. The ceremony was brief, but emotional. The long war had finally come to an end. As the news spread, soldiers and civilians reacted in different ways. Japanese soldiers stationed in distant places heard the announcement with disbelief. Some had fought for years, enduring hunger and disease. Now, they were told to lay down their weapons. For many, it was a bitter moment. They had dreamed of victory, but now they faced defeat. In Japan, the mood was somber. Families waited anxiously for their loved ones to return home. Trains brought soldiers back from the front lines. Many were thin, tired, and injured. They carried stories of battles, hardships, and loss. Some soldiers felt guilt for surviving when so many had died. The cities were filled with rubble. Streets were crowded with people searching for food or rebuilding their homes. Children played among the ruins, their laughter a rare sound of hope. Communities came together to share what little they had. The Japanese people began the long process of healing. For many, the end of the war brought mixed emotions. There was relief that the fighting had stopped. But there was also grief for the millions who had died. Families mourned fathers, sons, and brothers. Survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki carried the physical and emotional scars of the bombings. The pain of loss was everywhere. As Japan faced its defeat, the Allies began their occupation of the country. American soldiers arrived in Japan, not as enemies, but as overseers of peace. General MacArthur led the effort to rebuild Japan. He worked to create a new government, one based on democracy. The Japanese people were unsure at first. They had been told to fear the Americans. But over time, they saw that the occupation was focused on rebuilding, not revenge. Japan began to reflect on the cost of the war. The numbers were staggering. Millions of soldiers and civilians had died. Entire cities were destroyed. Families were broken. The Japanese people realized the war had brought more suffering than victory. Many began to question the decisions of their leaders. The surrender was also a turning point for the world. The use of atomic bombs shocked humanity. People everywhere asked if such weapons should ever be used again. The world had seen the horrors of war, and many hoped for lasting peace. In the years that followed, Japan worked to rebuild. Factories reopened. Schools were rebuilt. Farmers returned to their fields. People found strength in each other. They wanted to create a better future. The spirit of resilience was strong. The war taught Japan many lessons. It showed the dangers of unchecked power and the cost of war. It also taught the value of peace and cooperation. Japan's leaders vowed never to repeat the mistakes of the past. The people embraced a new vision for their country, one based on peace, prosperity, and progress. The soldiers who returned home faced their own challenges. Some struggled to find work. Others carried memories of the battlefield. But they were welcomed back by their families and communities. The war had ended, and now life had to go on. The emperor, once seen as divine, became a symbol of unity for the people. His decision to surrender had saved millions of lives. While many still revered him, others began to see him as a man, not a god. This marked a significant change in Japanese culture and society. For the Allies, Japan's surrender was a victory, but it was also a responsibility. The world had changed forever. The war showed the need for nations to work together to prevent future conflicts. The creation of the United Nations was one step toward that goal. The story of Japan's surrender is one of loss, but also of hope. The war had taken so much, but it also showed the strength of the human spirit. The Japanese people endured unimaginable hardship, yet they found the courage to rebuild. Their resilience became a symbol for the world. As the war ended, Japan looked to the future. It was a time of uncertainty, but also of possibility. What would the future hold? The people of Japan did not know, but they were ready to face it together, determined to rise from the ashes. Chapter 12. Rising from the Ashes, a New Japan. When the war ended in 1945, Japan was in ruins. Its cities were destroyed. Factories were silent. Families struggled to find food and shelter. The nation had lost everything, but its people had not lost hope. From the ashes of war, Japan began to rebuild. The work was not easy. Bombed-out cities like Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki were unrecognizable. Homes were gone. Roads were blocked by rubble. But the people did not give up. They cleared the streets, brick by brick. Neighbors helped each other. Communities came together, determined to start over. The Allied occupation brought changes. General Douglas MacArthur led the effort to rebuild Japan. He worked with Japanese leaders to create a new constitution. This document promised democracy, equality, and peace. For the first time, women were given the right to vote. The Japanese people embraced these changes. They wanted to build a better future. In the years after the war, Japan's economy began to grow. Factories reopened, producing goods for export. Farmers returned to their fields, planting crops to feed the nation. Schools were rebuilt, and children returned to their studies. Education became a priority. The people believed knowledge would help them succeed. One of Japan's greatest strengths was its spirit of resilience. Families worked hard to rebuild their lives. Parents took extra jobs. Children helped in small ways. Everyone contributed. Even those who had lost everything found the courage to move forward. The government also played an important role. It focused on rebuilding infrastructure, roads, railways, and factories. With help from the Allies, Japan started to recover. New industries grew, from electronics to automobiles. The country was changing, step by step. By the 1950s, Japan's economy was improving. The world began to notice. Japanese companies, like Sony and Toyota, became symbols of innovation and quality. Japan's products were exported around the world. This economic success became known as the Japanese miracle. But the journey was not just about rebuilding cities and factories. The Japanese people had to heal. Many had lost loved ones. Survivors of the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki carried deep scars, both physical and emotional. Yet, they found ways to move forward. Their stories inspired others. They became voices for peace. The lessons of the war were not forgotten. Japan's new constitution renounced war. The people committed themselves to peace. They focused on creating a nation that valued education, culture, and innovation. The painful memories of the past became a reminder of the importance of harmony. The 1960s brought even more change. Japan hosted the 1964 Summer Olympics in Tokyo. It was a proud moment for the nation. The world saw a new Japan, modern, peaceful, and vibrant. The event symbolized Japan's recovery and its place on the global stage. Art and culture also flourished. Writers, filmmakers, and artists shared stories that reflected Japan's past and present. Traditional arts, like tea ceremonies and calligraphy, remained important. At the same time, new ideas from around the world influenced Japanese culture. The nation became a blend of old and new. As Japan grew, its cities transformed. Tokyo became a bustling metropolis, full of skyscrapers and neon lights. Bullet trains connected the country, making travel faster and easier. Rural areas also developed, with new schools, hospitals, and industries. Japan's success was not just about wealth. It was about the strength of its people. They showed the world what could be achieved through hard work, unity, and determination. They took pride in their accomplishments, but remained humble. They remembered the sacrifices of those who had come before them. Education played a key role in Japan's rise. Schools taught not only knowledge, but also values like respect, discipline, and teamwork. Children learned the importance of contributing to society. These lessons shaped a new generation, ready to lead the country into the future. The Japanese people also became leaders in technology. Scientists and engineers created innovations that changed the world. From advanced robotics to groundbreaking electronics, Japan became a global leader in innovation. This progress brought jobs, opportunities, and pride. By the 1970s, Japan was one of the strongest economies in the world. Its influence grew in trade, culture, and technology. Tourists from around the globe visited to see the beauty of Mount Fuji, the bustling streets of Tokyo, and the historic temples of Kyoto. Japan had become a symbol of resilience and progress. Despite its success, Japan did not forget its past. Memorials were built to honor those who had suffered during the war. Museums in Hiroshima and Nagasaki educated visitors about the horrors of nuclear weapons. These places became reminders of the importance of peace. Japan's rise was not without challenges. Natural disasters, like earthquakes and typhoons, tested the nation's strength. Economic slowdowns brought uncertainty. But each time, the Japanese people responded with courage and unity. They rebuilt, adapted, and continued to move forward. Today, Japan is known as a peaceful and prosperous nation. Its cities are vibrant, its industries are innovative, and its culture is respected worldwide. The journey from war to recovery was long and difficult, but it showed the strength of the human spirit. The story of Japan's rise is a story of hope. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, there is a way forward. The resilience of the Japanese people inspires us to face challenges with courage and determination. Their journey is a testament to the power of unity and the will to overcome. As this chapter ends, we are left with a powerful lesson. From the ashes of war, a nation can rebuild. From loss and hardship, a new future can emerge. Japan's story is one of transformation, resilience, and hope. It is a story for the world.